Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you back to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder. We are talking about Contact Report 215 this evening, which occurred on February 28, 1987 at 2:09 a.m. The contact person is Quetzal. Quetzal was a Plejaren man who eventually became a Ishwish king of wisdom. At the time of the contacts, he was the commander of all the Plejaren stations in the Sol system. And Billy had a question about the massacre of the Palestinian refugees at Sabra and Shatila in the year of 1982. Quetzal stated that there were 3,468 people who lost their lives in this massacre, and the two real culprits of the massacre was the Israeli Prime Minister at the time, who was Menachem Begin, and the Defense Minister, Ariel Sharon. Quetzal explained that the two had secretly decided upon the massacre, and the massacre was committed by a Christian militia, which was called Gamel's Phalangists. Now, Bakr Gamel was the president-elect of Lebanon, and he was the senior member of this Phalange party. It was also called the Katab Party. It was a Christian political party in Lebanon, and according to Meyer material, the Phalange Party was responsible for the massacre at Sabra and Shatila. Sabra and Shatila were refugee camps in Lebanon. Now, Lebanon is north of Palestine. Palestine is the name that we give to the geographic area near the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River. The name was used in ancient Greek, and the region is known sometimes as the Promised Land or the Holy Land. The Promised Land was promised by God, according to the Hebrew Bible, to the Israelites, the descendants of Jacob. However, today the Jews and the Palestinians believe they are the intended inheritors of this divine promise. Now, so this is part of the issue here, is we have two people that claim divine promises here. They both feel that they're entitled to this area, and that God, the religious deity of Islam and of Judaism, has promised them both this land. Now, who is Ariel Sharon? Now, we said Menachem Begin was the defense minister of Israel. Menachem Begin was the prime minister at that time, the sixth prime minister of Israel. Ariel Sharon was at this time the defense minister. Ariel Sharon is an Israeli politician. He's a general. He was the 11th prime minister of Israel until he was incapacitated by a stroke, and he was a commander in the Israeli army all the way from 1948. So anyway, I do have a clip here. I'm probably going to be playing some rather lengthy clips this evening. This is a clip of Ariel Sharon talking to an interviewer at the 60 Minutes program, and this interviewer is pretty good. She asked some really hard questions to Ariel Sharon. Remember, the Meyer material explains that Ariel Sharon and Menachem Begin were the two that had secretly decided upon this massacre. And they're both considered to be kind of, I guess you might consider them war criminals. Let's listen to our clip.
60 Minutes. Rewind.
Here in Israel, it has been one of the bloodiest weekends most Israelis have ever lived through, and in some ways we've lived through it with them. In the midst of this bloody weekend, the Prime Minister, Ariel Sharon, took time out to explain to us why he launched the most massive military crackdown on the Palestinians in 20 years. The situation is so difficult that he went on Israeli television tonight to blame Yasser Arafat for directing and initiating the terror and to assure his people they will be victorious. In his news conference yesterday, President Bush condemned Arafat for the terrorism, but not Ariel Sharon for the retaliation. We spent a good part of yesterday afternoon with the Prime Minister at his farm in the heart of the country. He's been condemned around the world. The wisdom of his action questioned by those who wonder if he's thought this through. While we were talking, tanks were breaking down walls in Ramallah, and Yasser Arafat was effectively under house arrest without electricity for a while, giving interviews by flashlight. You have said that Arafat is the enemy. You have said in the past that you wished him dead, and you said that you made a mistake in promising President Bush that you wouldn't kill him. Look, is that what you want to do now? Do you want to rub him out, as we say?
We don't have any intention to hurt him physically.
What about expel him?
We have to consider all the possible ways that would enable us to uproot the terror.
You might expel him?
I don't know.
You're isolating him. For what purpose? What's the reason? What is this whole operation? You don't want to kill him.
Most of our casualties at the present time are casualties caused by organizations that are paid by him, like the Tanzim, and the purpose is to isolate him from giving all instructions or any other thing or any guidance to these organizations.
Have you been able, since this operation started, to pick up any communications he's had? Has he been giving orders?
Look,
either to continue the terrorism or to stop the terrorism?
It's a different situation now. Once he's isolated, it's a different situation now. He cannot have all those meetings with the commanders that were in charge of the most terrible assassinations and murder. It makes it harder.
Mr. Sharon read from a list of suicide bombings since the recent Palestinian uprising began in September 2000.
Just look at the numbers. I'll take from the Dolphinarium, 21 killed, 120 injured. I'll take these restaurants, bar in Jerusalem, 15 killed, all civilians. In another event in Jerusalem, 11 killed, 180 injured.
I don't think anybody denies that Israel has suffered a series of horrendous suicide attacks. But is what's happening now playing into Arafat's hands? Here he is, this one man, holed up in this little place without electricity. All he has is a phone and a machine gun.
You don't have to worry about that.
Here he is, he's David, you're Goliath, and this big mighty power is coming after him. Are you playing into his hands? That's what I'm asking.
I would have expected the world not to look with such mercy at somebody who is responsible for all this suffering, but to look at the victims. I must tell you, for me, it's harder to watch those two baby girls that were left alone when their parents were killed just a few days ago. Why the world is not shocked by that? Why the world is not shocked by that?
In the last couple of months, there have been pregnant Palestinian women, Palestinian children, innocent civilians on the other side that have also been killed in these crackdowns. What do you feel about that?
I feel very bad about that. As a soldier for many years, I know that in battles, in wars, sometimes civilians are killed or hurt. And every casualty is a tragedy. But you have to remember one thing. It's not a war that we started.
Has the situation come down to a personal vendetta between you and Yasser Arafat? There are those in Israel and in the United States who feel that you are so angry with him, you hate him so much, that it's affecting your decision-making.
The answer is no. Just no.
Well, what do you think of him?
Nothing personal.
You hate him.
Look, may I tell you something? I don't hate anyone. Don't hate anyone. I see the victims. Our victims, their victims, and I know who is responsible for that. It's nothing to do, there is no any hatred, it's beyond any hatred. It's not a personal thing.
Colin Powell, just the other day, said, Arafat, I'm quoting him, Arafat is the leader of the Palestinian people. His leadership is more central than ever. He said that after your operation started. When this is over, aren't you going to have to go and deal with him again? He's the leader.
Arafat is the main obstacle to peace in the Middle East. The main obstacle to peace. I don't think that we have to deal with him anymore.
You don't think you have to deal with him anymore?
No, I don't think so.
Can you name one Palestinian who could replace Arafat who's strong enough to stop the suicide bombers?
I'll tell you, I believe that there are many.
Can you name even one?
No, I'm not going to name. I'm not going to name.
The military operation is now 3 days old, but the guns and the tanks have not stopped the suicide attacks. A bombing at a restaurant in Haifa today, at least a dozen dead. Last night it was this cafe, a crowded cafe right here in downtown Tel Aviv. You still see people out on the streets, but more and more Israelis are afraid to leave their homes, to go to family events like weddings, to go shopping, to go out to eat. Despite the United Nations resolution calling on Sharon to withdraw the forces, he says defiantly that this military operation will go on for a long time, at least several weeks.
The Jews are having the right and the capability to defend themselves by themselves. That is our duty. We have to defend our lives.
Let me quote something you've said. You said this on March 4th. This is the aim of Israeli policy, is to increase the number of losses on the other side. Only after they've been battered will we be able to conduct talks. And this is a policy of bludgeoning. Do you really think that
Tell you something. I saw this quoting.
Is that not an accurate quote of you?
It not exactly the accurate one.
Is that not your policy, though? Increase the number of losses on the other side?
May I tell you something? Our policy is not to cause, I would say, to inflict heavy casualties on them. Our goal is to arrest, first of all, to arrest. If we would have wanted to cause them heavy casualties, that's the easiest thing to do.
When you talk about destroying the infrastructure of terrorism, and you go after the Palestinian Authority, I mean, that is actually the Palestinian government.
We are not acting against the Palestinian Authority.
You've smashed their walls. You've broken down into the compound.
Look, we smashed the walls because that was the place where instructions and orders were given for murder and killing. That's what is important, for murder and killing. We found there big quantities of weapons. Matter of fact, a weapon that they are not allowed to keep. They are not allowed to keep anti-tank weapons. They are not allowed to keep mines.
And they were in this compound.
Yes.
You're in Ramallah. Where else does this go?
Let's say that we are going to uproot the basis of the terrorist organizations, their supporters.
Hamas,
Islamic Jihad, the Popular Front.
So what you did in Ramallah, we're going to see replicated in other places.
I think we have to not to talk about that now. But I said it's very clearly we are going to do that and that not in order to postpone peace, but in order to enable to reach peace.
But if you round up 1,000 people, you round up 5,000 people, it only takes one suicide bomber to kill a lot of Israelis. Can you ever exhaust the supply of these suicide bombers?
There are two possibilities here. One is not to do anything and just to have daily killings. And the other way is to try and act against with the hope that that will be reduced, that the number will be reduced. And you have to know that due to our activities, we managed in the last a couple of weeks to stop or arrest 25 attempts of suicide bombers, or maybe even more than that were on their way to act in Israel. In 2 weeks, 25.
Do you feel that you have full U.S. backing for this military action?
I don't think so. I never asked any support for that. I think the present administration, it's maybe one of the most friendly, if not the friendly, administration that I remember for many years now. But we have not got any green light.
Sharon says Mr. Bush understands the threat to Israel posed by countries in the axis of evil, including Iran.
Iran is declaring that their goal and targets is to eliminate the state of Israel and eliminate.
So let me pick back up with this conversation with Quetzal and Billy. Again, Quetzal says, together these two secretly decided upon the massacre. The two that he's talking about are Ariel Sharon and Menachem Begin. And then arranged with the Christian militias, respectively, the responsible persons of Gamal's phalangists. Gamal was the president of Lebanon. Bakr Gamal was the president of Lebanon. He's the man that was assassinated. The massacre at Shatila and Sabra was a payback for this assassination of the president. Anyway, that was the idea, with the promise that the Israeli occupation troops wouldn't intervene, following which the murderous militias could then freely enter into the refugee camps and carry out their atrocities. Begin's and Sharon's secret agreement with the leaders of the Christian killer brigades never became known because all those who were responsible have remained silent to this day, and of course they will continue to do so. Quetzal continues here. But with what happened in the year 1982, it won't be enough, because Ariel Sharon, who thinks the Palestinians look better dead than alive, won't halt his murderous deeds. He goes on and explains that eventually Ariel Sharon will be the head of the state in Israel in 2001. And then down in line 11, he says, through Ariel Sharon, very much disaster, evil and pain, suffering and death will be spread into the new millennium. Well, the Meyer material often talks about the new millennium. It's called the third millennium. And the third millennium began in 1945, really, when we dropped the atomic bombs on Japan, on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. There will be certain trends that happen in the third millennium. There will be confusion and maliciousness that will spread over the earth. There will be a slowly approaching global collapse. Our leaders will become megalomaniacal. They will take away our rights of self-determination. The people in turn will become indolent, obtuse, and indifferent. This will create the breeding ground for all kinds of conflict. We're slowly approaching this third global conflagration, which could be a third world war. It could be the collapse of nature. And we'll get very deep into the events that occur in the third millennium in this Contact 215. Anyway, again, it says, line 11, through Ariel Sharon, very much disaster, evil, and pain, suffering, and death will be spread into the new millennium because he will be able to indulge uninhibitedly in this murderous and in his murderous and inhumane ambitions. That's the way the Meyer material explains the man you just heard on that 60 Minutes interview. They describe him as murderous and inhumane. They describe him as evil. And it's very interesting if you study what evil is. Evil in a general context is the absence of good. And often evil is denoted as profound immorality. Definitions of evil can vary, but I like the definition of evil that talks about evil involving unbalanced behavior, expediency, selfishness, ignorance, and neglect. Some synonyms for unbalanced behavior include demented, disturbed, unhinged, insane. So the Meyer material describes Ariel Sharon as evil. I'll let you make your own decisions on that. The next topic that Billy and Quetzal start to discuss is genetic engineering. Billy asks, then to something else. For now, I have once again heard of enough evil that the future will bring. How does it stand then with the progress related to genetic engineering? Now, the Meyer material says genetic engineering is actually a normal evolution of mankind. That eventually genetic engineering can be a good thing. Now, I don't know that it is right now. It's normal to make many errors in genetic engineering. Genetic engineering is also called genetic modification, and it's the direct manipulation of an organism's genome using biotechnology. Remember DNA? DNA is called deoxyribonucleic acid, and it's often depicted as this double helix, this spiral shape, and the spiral shape has two vertical structures that go up in it, and these two vertical structures have connectors between them that look something like a ladder, and that's the basis for all life, and all of the genetic code of all life is found in that DNA. But Billy goes on to talk about genetic engineering. He says, you've already told me a few things, but now in relation to this, the question arose in our group during a discussion, when will it have come so far that genetic science will merge plant and animal genes together? Now this is real interesting because plant and animal genes have been merged together in the ancient past. And the Lyrians merged plant and animal genes in ancient times. Our ancestors thought they were angels. Now, believe it or not, if you look in some verses in the book of Revelation, I think it's chapter 4, it talks about the seraphim and the cherubim, the six-winged angels, which were the seraphim, and the four-winged angels, the cherubim. The Meyer material says genetic manipulation of any other kind does not fall under it. Let me step back a little bit and read a little bit more. This is not to say that genetic engineering and gene manipulation in itself is contrary to the laws of creation. This is not the case, quite the opposite, because both lie within the framework of creational principles and therefore are in line with progress and the evolution of human beings. Now, there is something that's described in the Meyer material as gene sodomy. Gene sodomy is what they call asartung. Asartung means to get very bad, out of control of the good human nature. So asartung is not desirable. Now, gene sodomy is the result of gene intersections of different flora and fauna that forms new species and kinds of life form which are themselves capable of reproduction and thus in a position to give birth. So evidently that they consider bad is when you create unnatural life forms that then can replicate themselves. And it goes on to say genetic manipulation of any other kind does not fall under it because it is in whole always only through gene sodomy in which new life forms are created, as I said, are capable of reproduction, including animal human seraphim and human animal cherubim, which have been glorified in irrational-based teachings by the Christian religion as angels. So, according to the Meyer material, the Latin name seraphim leads back to the old Lyrian symbol serhab, which was used for animal people. This was a very strange genetic engineering that was done in the ancient past by the Lyrians. These creatures had 6 wings and were in the shape of a snake. It also states that they had the feet of animals. However, they were not angels. They were the product of a very advanced genetic engineering done by extraterrestrial humans. That's what the Meyer material says. It looks like I have a caller. I don't know if I have any answers tonight, but I will take the call and see what happens here. So I'll bring 678 on the air. Hello, 678.
Hey, how you doing?
Who am I speaking to? What should I call you?
You can call me Issa Labella.
Issa Labella?
Yeah.
So, Issa Labella, how are you tonight?
I'm doing great. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, too.
Okay. Yeah, I've been listening to your show for quite some time, so I have a couple questions that I wanted to ask you. One is, when was this Meyer material that you're talking about? When was it released? So, is this definitely before the time, or was this kind of like a prophecy, or was it something that you were, or not you, it was something that Billy was talking about like beforehand? He just released it, and it was actually written beforehand, or he knew it before, or did he release it afterwards? Or I'm just trying to get a timeline on to when all this stuff was released.
This contact occurred in February 28th, 1987, 2:09 a.m. It was probably published, I'm just guessing at this, maybe within a year or two of that.
Okay. So, there's definitely a lot of feedback we say about the whole Israel situation that's going on, for sure. My other question is there any kind of information that you know, speaking of, because you're talking about what we're talking about right now, your subject you're talking about, is that I remember reading not some time ago about talking about like when our planet was in a different position as far as being close to the Earth, like when the dinosaurs. You're talking about people that with the different wings like that, but as far as the being close to the sun, the dinosaurs. Well, excuse me, hear me out at least. Because the dinosaurs saying that they were extinct when the like a meteor or something hit. But if we were closer to the sun of different type, then obviously the brontosaurus, the tyrannosaurus, things could actually grow into a bigger size. You know what I mean? Because of our gravity for holding the dinosaurs down to a certain level. So I'm just trying to remember who that person was that was actually talking about it. He had some really good information about it. And I was trying to actually kind of link it to what you're talking about right now. But I guess, do you know who I'm talking about? Because what they're saying is that, yes, where we're at right now, the relativity of where we're at right now compared to where we, as far as close to the sun, is that the dinosaurs could never actually live at this closeness to the sun because of the gravity. But if our planet was in a different place before the extinction of the dinosaurs, then that would actually explain why the dinosaurs, the size and their girth, and actually how they were able to move, because the gravity spectrum would be so much different. Does this make any sense at all?
It's really interesting you bring this up, because in about, maybe a page or two, we're going to actually talk about dinosaurs, but we won't get there tonight. It's really interesting that this is brought up in this contact, and you're asking this question. Now,
well, that's why I've never called you. I listen to you all the time, but this is the very first time I ever called you, because I've been always waiting for a time to actually throw this in. But I remember reading about an artist or a person, a scholar, that actually said that it doesn't make any sense for our relativity of where we're close to the sun right now, and Mars, definitely because of all the explosions that have happened in our galaxy. But the reason it just clicked to me, because of if we were in a different position, then that would explain why we had dinosaurs and how they were able to run around and do this and so forth, so on. But now, if you take Brontosaurus, take these dinosaurs, and our relativity to where we are as far as the gravity is concerned, they could never actually experience what we're experiencing, because of they couldn't even move. Like an animal that size right now couldn't even move his fat ass, because he'd be the gravity is so much stronger. So. But anyways, I'll get off the air, but I just wanted to throw it out there, and if there was anything you could, I know there was somebody that actually spoke about it, and I just wanted to throw it out there. So, Happy New Year, and I'll get off the air and just keep speaking, because I enjoy your show, and keep up good work, right?
Okay, thanks. I appreciate you calling.
Yeah, thank you. Bye, Mark.
Yeah,
bye, Mark.
Thank you. I will comment on that a little bit. I don't have all the answers there. I don't know of a difference in our gravity. But I do know that in the past that the Earth had a much thicker atmosphere with a much higher oxygen content. And, for example, that's why the trees were so incredibly large in the ancient past, is because of this thicker oxygen content. And the same is true for a lot of the animals. Now, the gravity thing, I hadn't heard, I hadn't read about at all. Now, the Earth, I don't know so much that the Earth has changed its location in relation to the sun. However, at one time, there was, the solar system kind of looked like this. It was Mercury, Venus, Earth, a planet called Mellona, and then a planet called Mars, and then we had the other planets. Mellona was destroyed by its inhabitants at some point, but before Mellona was destroyed, Mars and Mellona kind of switched places when the Destroyer Comet came through. And the Destroyer Comet also deposited Venus in place. So the configuration of our solar system was different in the past, and the Earth had a much thicker atmosphere, and that played a role in things growing so large. Like, I don't know if you've ever heard of tomato plants growing in hyperbaric chambers, but they'll grow incredibly huge in that high oxygen content. Maybe a little off topic, but that's just in relation to the question. I wanted to respond there. Now, the next thing that we're going to talk about, or we were talking about genetic engineering. And I've got a very interesting clip here, but I'm going to have to find it, and it's on DNA, and it's on how science here on the Earth first learned how to do genetic manipulation. So let's listen to our clip here, and thanks for that caller. Very interesting questions.
"50 years ago, two scientists made a discovery that would change the world. Jim Watson and Francis Crick revealed the structure of DNA, the single molecule that carries the genetic instructions to build all living things.
We'd done something really important, so we had discovered the secret of life.
But how could the billions of lines of genetic code that make everything from a human to a hippo be unscrambled? What were the genes for eye color, for cancer, for intelligence? Searching for the answer triggered the creation of a powerful new technology, genetic engineering. It enabled scientists to manipulate DNA and transfer it from one species to another, allowing the genetic makeup of plants and animals to be altered in the lab. This work sparked a storm of controversy that continues to this day.
We're worried about some of these experiments. Maybe you all haven't thought about them. Why don't we all get together and talk about it?
Some saw this work as a threat to humanity.
There could be contamination, infections, something that could crawl out of the laboratory, such as a Frankenstein.
Others believed it was the future.
These experiments offer exciting potential both for advancing knowledge of fundamental biological processes and for alleviation of human health problems.
For the first time, humans would have the power to accelerate evolution according to their own design and alter the destiny of life on Earth.
DNA produced this brain. The brain understands DNA, so DNA eventually came to understand itself.
Inside every cell of every living thing is an incredibly long molecule of DNA. If we could magnify DNA 10 million times, this is what it would look like. Scientifically accurate computer animations enable us to see how it is intricately wrapped up inside each of our cells like a 1,000-mile-long strand of spaghetti. Biologists knew that hidden within these coils were a large number of different genes, but where did one begin and another end? Which genes made flesh and which ones blood? Could they find all the genes that make the proteins of our body? To solve this puzzle, they needed to find a way of cutting the strand into manageable gene-sized chunks. Back in the 1970s, in California, a group of scientists came up with a radical idea to tackle this problem. If they could isolate individual genes and transfer them to another species, they might be able to understand how they worked and what they made. No one paid much attention at the time, but a young researcher named Herb Boyer was about to become the world's first genetic engineer.
I thought there were a lot of exciting things to do. Within 10 years after the discovery of the structure of DNA, those were my young student years. And young students have no problems thinking that there's nothing left to be discovered. That just happens to old men, you know, or older men. They're the ones that think there's nothing left to be discovered.
Working in the lab of a San Francisco hospital, Boyer spent his days studying tiny but remarkable creatures, bacteria. Because they're simple and breed rapidly, they make ideal experimental subjects. One morning, a batch of bacteria caught his attention. They contained an enzyme that locked onto the DNA, scurried along its length, and then severed it like a pair of wire cutters. In theory, the strand left dangling could join up with any other piece of DNA. When Herb Boyer met Stan Cohen at a conference, they compared notes and realized that between them they might just have the tools to do something extraordinary.
I was very interested in Herb's science. I thought the work that he was doing was exciting, and I thought the ability to use enzymes to cut DNA in a specific way would be very useful for the kinds of experiments that I wanted to carry out.
Cohen had spent years isolating genes from various species. Until now, he had nowhere to put them. Among his collection was a gene from an African clawed toad. In March 1973, Boyer and Cohen began an historic experiment to try to get the toad gene to work in a bacterium. Using Boyer's enzyme, Cohen sliced open the bacterium's DNA and inserted the toad gene. But would the bacterium treat the new DNA as if it was its own? In another part of the bacterium, they would find out. When the toad's genetic instructions were translated from DNA code into the building blocks of all life, protein, incredibly, the bacterial cells were tricked into producing toad protein. DNA's instructions for creating living matter were universal. They could be transferred between species like files between computers. The single bacterium multiplied rapidly into millions, each an identical copy of the original. Here was a living factory, churning out fragments of toad, one life form manufacturing bits of another. This experiment was a turning point in biology. Genetic engineering was born.
It was a moment I'll never forget. I could pretty much see that this was going to change biological sciences. You know, one of the things that was so revolutionary, I guess, about this technology was that it was so easy when we actually did it.
News of the breakthrough spread quickly. Everyone wanted to try gene splicing to see what they could create. But just as the new science was about to take off, there were the first rumblings of trouble ahead.
When they reported this, I think people were astounded that it could be done that easily, and the promise that provided for new kinds of experimental approaches. But there were a few people in the audience who, in fact, were concerned about the possibility that people would put things into these bacteria that would, in fact, create some public health hazard.
At Paul Berg's lab, they were experimenting with genes that cause cancer. He wanted to splice cancer genes with bacteria genes, but his plans set off alarm bells.
One of my students had to give a talk about what was going on in her home lab. That seemed to have invoked a huge concern amongst the teacher in that course named Bob Pollock. And Pollock told her he thought that was the most dangerous and outrageous experiment that anybody could possibly do.
I posed to her the simple question whether she had thought about the fact that she was bridging evolutionary barriers that had existed since the last common ancestors of bacteria and people.
Berg had proposed transferring cancer genes into a widely studied bacterium called E. coli. Unfortunately, this bacterium also thrives inside the human gut.
You have tons of bacteria in your gut. The most common of these is E. coli. My scenario is you handle these bacteria. They have a tumor gene in them. They get into your gut. You have no idea. You don't have diarrhea. You have no symptoms. And they live there. And they propagate there. And they make clones, and they're very happy there. And then a piece of the DNA gets out and makes a tumor in your gut. I called Paul Berg, and we had two conversations. The first of which was very abrupt, and I don't think a phone conversation can be thought of as violent, but it was unpleasant.
He called me to convey his concern, and I said I thought it was bunk. My first reaction was that this was absurd. I didn't see any risk to it.
You ever scratch your head? You ever pick your nose, touching it like that? That's it. Here, that's it. If you're in a lab with E. coli, brings E. coli into your gut. Simple.
I thought that was highly unlikely, but nevertheless, after some consideration and consultation, I came to the conclusion that I could not say with 100% assurance that this experiment would pose zero risk.
Bard called for a temporary halt to all genetic engineering experiments. He invited biology's leading thinkers to a summit to assess the real risks.
We're worried about some of these experiments. Why don't we all talk about it and see collectively whether there is, in fact, any basis for this concern? Are there risks? And if there are, what do we do about it?
It was a period of just after the Vietnam War. They were concerned about doing things that would come back to haunt us. So I think there was probably a little extra sensitivity to doing something responsible.
The ban on DNA experiments put the future of genetic engineering in the balance. Paul Bard warned that if scientists didn't police themselves and control this new technology, then the government might intervene and shut them down. The scientists agreed to meet in California to set guidelines. But one of DNA's founding fathers, Jim Watson, was concerned that airing doubts might awaken public anxiety.
Human society is prospering because it tries new things. Some people are afraid to do new things. I guess you call them conservative. I've never been conservative about moving ahead unless I agreed to work. I thought these people just want the world to stay as it is. I don't want the world to stay as it is.
In what used to be a church in Asilomar, California, 150 scientists gathered from all over the world to discuss the fate of their research.
The issue that does bring us here is that a new technique of molecular biology appears to have allowed us to outdo the standard events of evolution by making combinations of genes which could be unique in natural history.
For 4 days, the scientists wrestled with a paradox. They were excited by what recombining genes could tell them about nature, but some were afraid they might damage forever the very life they sought to understand.
In the press, the danger became magnified, as if we were equating the danger from recombinant DNA to nuclear energy.
In addition to the scientists, a select group of lawyers and journalists had been invited. They were surprised to hear that most of those planning experiments had little experience of handling infectious agents in the lab. It was all too easy to imagine a disaster scenario.
Part of what went on was that people in microbiology who were familiar with some of the dangers of the pathogens that were being used experimentally began to educate their molecular colleagues about taking necessary precautions, and they were rather horrified. And there were some jokes that went on, were exchanged about the kinds of things people had done.
There are standard microbiological techniques, one of which is don't eat or drink in the laboratory, which is something that the biochemists and microbial geneticists and other people simply take for granted.
Some of the people who were experienced hooted at us and say, you people are so sloppy, you don't even know any of the techniques to work with these kinds of organisms. How could you be contemplating doing something which is possibly of some risk?
I was seeing communism in action. They sort of, thought police. There were so many things you should worry about. And I just thought this was a minor one for the world.
I'm going to take issue with it because you have people around you, and if they're banging on your door saying, we're worried about what you're doing, you try to do everything you can to protect them.
The point of the conference was to discuss how to make genetic engineering safe, but the delegates couldn't contain their excitement with the science itself.
The exchange of scientific information really built up a crescendo of interest among the scientists here, And one of the most interesting places to stand during the breaks in the meeting was near the telephone. People lined up to get to the payphone and to call their labs and say, oh, I've just learned this or that wonderful thing. When I get back next week, we're going to start on this or that. They were simply learning from each other. The presentations here were cutting-edge presentations.
I feel very strongly that it is an experiment which should not categorically ever be done, period.
As the scientific debate flourished, questions of public safety took a back seat.
My understanding is it should not be done now.
They were about to receive a reality check.
The last night, just before we broke for the beer, was when the lawyers spoke. They were the last ones on the program that night, and they put the fear of God into people in the audience.
It is exhilarating to hear about the delightfully clever things your colleagues have just discovered, so that you may emerge from a session not filled with concern over the hazards, but inspired instead by desire to pursue the research to the next tantalizing goal.
Anyway, that's a really interesting clip. Maybe we'll play more of that in the future. So anyway, the debate goes on today. Is genetic engineering good? Is genetic engineering bad? Quetzal tells Billy the science of genetic engineering is established in the laws of overall evolution. So genetic engineering will eventually be good. Is it necessarily good now? I would say I don't know. I don't personally eat GMO corn. I think you'll have to decide that for yourself. Quetzal goes on to say that due to the irrationality and irresponsibility of the genetic opponents, it will be that a lot of genetic progress for all humans, animals, and plants, as well as water and air, which I find interesting. There will be some genetic activity related to water and air. And even for all of nature will be prevented for many years, even though life could be prolonged by centuries through genetic engineering. So human life could be prolonged by centuries. Now, I don't know if you remember this particularly, but our DNA here on the Earth has been affected such that we have a very shortened lifespan and very increased aggression. And that goes all the way back to the Cirrus system, but in a different space-time configuration. There were a group of humans genetically engineered by this group that the Meyer material refers to as the creator overlords. And these humans were actually kind of genetically engineered as fighters, because this one group from Lyra Vega that eventually moved to the Cirrus system had kind of lost their ability to fight effectively. So they created this lower class of humanity, so to speak, to do their fighting for them. But eventually they became kind of afraid and worried that these genetically engineered humans would somehow turn on their creators. So they decided to wipe out these humans. A group of them escaped from the Cirrus system. Again, the Cirrus system is another Cirrus system. There are multiple space-time configurations in our Milky Way galaxy. But anyway, they came here and they first populated the planet Mars and the planet Melona. Now, these genetically engineered humans with this enhanced tendency to fight eventually completely exploded this planet Melona, which became our asteroid belt. And some of these asteroids became kind of satellites of Saturn. If you remember in Contact 150, it talked about there being actually 29 moons of Saturn that are real moons. Our scientists today say there are some 60 moons, but these smaller moons are actually fragments of that destroyed planet Melona. One of the fragments of the destroyed planet Melona was eventually brought into the Earth as a weapon during the time of Atlantis and Lemuria. So anyway, to make a long story short, these genetically engineered humans destroyed the planet Malona, but not before some of them came here, passed on this genetic modification to the Earth people through sex, through natural means, I guess. I'm assuming that's how it got passed on. So eventually, Contact 251 explains that we will discover this genetic flaw that we have because Earth humans should live to be 1,000 years old, just like the Plejaren do. Can you imagine if you were able to live that long? Anyway, eventually, I'm not saying that we're there yet because I think there's still a lot of problems with genetic engineering, but eventually our health could be stabilized so that we would almost never get sick through genetic engineering. Also, plants, fruits, and vegetables, as well as other food products, could be genetically altered for our benefit. So I think that there's legitimate concerns for genetic engineering. We're at the very beginnings of this science, and I'm sure we're going to make mistakes. I saw an interesting YouTube video about clones. They're cloning cattle now, and they showed these 8 cattle that were perfect clones. They were beautiful animals, and they were behaving almost exactly the same. It was very interesting. So anyway, even in the current time, it says here, many series of experiments like these are already running in scientific laboratories around the world, as we just heard from that documentary there. It's just that they are being concealed in many cases, and to be sure, with the full authorization of irrational and irresponsible genetic opponents. Anyway, we'll revisit this whole idea of genetic engineering in the future. We are actually talking today about Contact 215, which contain the prophecies, the Hanok prophecies, that talk about the potential civil wars that may be coming to the United States. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed the show. I've had fun tonight. I like taking a break sometimes and not talking so much and just playing some clips. I hope you're enjoying the Meyer material. Google Ohio Exopolitics sometime, and you'll get exopoliticsohio.us. I put the archives up there, both from Revolution Radio and from the Blog Talk Radio show. And I have a lot of interesting information about the Meyer material up there posted. I hope you've enjoyed the show this evening. We'll see you later in the week. Have a good week. I don't know if you're going to have snow where you are, but we're supposed to get something like 4 to 6 inches this week. So be safe, be careful, and we'll talk to you soon.